Today is the Day of Trumpets, which in the Bible is called Yom Teruah. And a lot of people in Christianity, like most of them, Hal Lindsey's and this and that, like they know that the day of the Lord will come. They know the same scriptures that we're going to read, but they don't ever explore what these things mean. Always coming back with the sound of a trumpet. They just think that Trump that is only significant of his return, and they don't understand that this day was was prophesied a very long time before the Messiah came and the first time. And so we're just going to go through a basic scriptures about this information that was commonplace in the first century. All the first century believers will see that what Paul writes. We'll see that how Yeshua alludes to it. We'll talk about Revelation. The fact that this day signifies the return of the Messiah and the end of the age was just common knowledge to these guys. But Christianity has forgotten it because they wanted to separate from anything Jewish. I'm using both quote. I'm using the other arm too. I'm just leaving it down there, right? So they didn't. They just don't like the Old Testament. They don't like the front part of the Bible, and so they just think that Jesus came to make a new religion, and we're just going to start from scratch. We don't need all that old stuff. Not and that's a huge mistake because everything he did was prophesied to happen, happened, and he didn't do everything. There's more things to come, and part of it is this day. This day is the next thing to happen in prophecy. Where we sit, as far as the biblical timeline goes, is we're waiting. The next stop is the return of the Messiah. And Paul talks about this here in 1 Thessalonians 4, 13 through 18, which I don't quite have on the screen. We do not want you to be uninformed, brethren, about those who are asleep, so that you will not grieve as do the rest who have no hope. For if we believe that Yeshua died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep in Yeshua. For this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Messiah will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, so we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. The world is falling apart. And it seems like every year it's more crazy than the last year for a while. How many are you guys tired of panic buying stuff yet? I am. Yeah, I yeah, well, we are panic buyers. You are? You're just procrastinating the panic buying? No, yeah, there's that. Um, but most people believe, I don't know. I don't know if they believe this or not because they don't believe that people are dead. They believe that people are already in heaven. And this is contrary to most Christian, even the Catholics who end their prayer every week with, we look for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. Don't believe it. They say it every week. And then they turn around and say Aunt Edna's either in purgatory or she's in heaven. You know? Is your mic on? Yeah.
Is this where they think that the living will go up, not the dead? The rapture, yeah.
Oh, yeah, but it says the dead in Messiah will rise first, and then us after. But they think
I've never heard of that with Christianity.
yeah, right. And this was one of the things that when a long time ago, my wife challenged me to find the Sabbath in the Bible. This is one of the things I came across that I really wasn't looking for. That it didn't look to me that hell existed yet, right? It didn't look to me that people were dead and floating around in clouds and stuff like that. And the Bible doesn't even talk about that. It talks about a resurrection. Paul started a riot talking about the resurrection of the dead. And one of the biggest things that Yeshua's death proved is that the resurrection's a real thing because he was resurrected by God 3 days and nights later. So this is where we just have these differences because we're just plainly reading it. And what's really interesting is that they Christianity knows there's a future event coming. They know the Messiah is coming back, and they just guess. When's it going to happen? They're always trying to figure out who's Gog, who's Magog, and who's the people from the north. They're always trying to figure this stuff out from secular prophecy or secular events and history. But if they would just look at Leviticus 23, they would see that they could get a lot more further down the road by understanding the holy days have meaning beyond just being some ritual that was supposedly done away with in the past. Yeah. And the Jews do actually know that the great and terrible day of the Lord is associated with the Day of Trumpets. And they know that Yom Kippur is a solemn occasion for all mankind. They know these things. Now, do they know them because of the time that Christianity and Judaism were the same thing? Right? Because when I looked at the Jewish Haggadah, a Jewish Passover, there's a lot of New Testament in there, and I don't think they know that there's a lot of New Testament in this thing, right? So I don't know, but they know that these things are related to future events. They just don't know it as much as well as we do. There are really big hints, though, in the Torah and in the prophets as to the timing of the events. We're not going to know the hour or the day, but we can know that there is a holiday that signifies the return of the Messiah that was put in place a long time before he came. And so we'll go look at that right now. Leviticus 23. Now, the first thing is the King James calls these the feasts of the Lord. That's what that title is. They are not the feasts of the Lord, right? They're the appointed times of Yahweh, the appointed times of the Lord. A couple of them aren't feasts at all, specifically Yom Kippur. No feasting going on that day, 10 days from now, right? But these are Yahweh's appointed times, which you shall proclaim as holy convocations. My appointed times are these. These are meeting times for us to get together with the creator of the universe. He sends the invite. He expects his people to show up. It's just that simple. And it's just that simple. You don't have to convert to some other religion. You don't have to do any traditions. You don't have to do anything other than just show up when he wants us to show up. And the first one is the Sabbath. Every week, you stop working Friday sunset to Saturday sunset. You get together with the brethren and you just do what he says to do. And your life becomes so much more meaningful when you just let it happen, when you get out of the way and let things submit, right? Because there's three choices that you're going to make in sequence. Submit to him now, and good. Submit to him when he comes back, right? Or don't submit to him at all. But right, and that third one is bad. And not submitting today when you know better is pretty bad. And so these things are really important. And if you just do it, very simple today, not a lot of language, right? Not a lot of, hidden things, because the things that we all share in common in our religion, in our faith of the first century believers, messianics, the way, whatever else you want to call us, the things that we just do naturally are hidden from most of the world. We take it for granted and we live this life. And hasn't your lives gotten better when you decided to do this? Well, Tiffany says mentally, she was shaking her head. Yeah, you have had more trials and tribulations, but you came through them, and you came through them at the exact right time because Yahweh needed you two united for a different mission, you know? So these things don't happen on accident. Um,
Oh, yeah.
mm,
Because now that we're in the truth and we know the truth, everything makes sense. It all goes together.
yeah,
The old and new are joined together and it makes sense now. And we
right,
know we're going to have tribulations and trials when we do it.
right.
Because he says they hated me, they'll hate you.
Okay. So we're not going to go through this whole chapter. We're just going to go down to the part about the Day of Trumpets, because this outlines all of the holy days. And then we get to the Feast of Trumpets, which is a feast, a Chag, C-H-A-G means festival. And it says, Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel in the 7th month, on the 1st of the month, you shall have a rest, a reminder by blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. You shall not do any work, but you shall present an offering by fire to Yahweh. This should sound familiar to you because it's the similar language that Paul used to talk about the return of the Messiah. When Paul says the Lord will return with a shout, with the sound of the trumpet, and the dead and Messiah will rise first, he is referring to this day. And the of trumpets is in italics because it's not really there. And this word blowing is teruah, and teruah means a racket, a calamity, a noise, a clanging, or it can mean blowing of trumpets, or it can mean shouting. It means something that's big and obvious and noisy, and everybody's gonna see it, which the New Testament tells us when the Messiah returns, every knee will bow, every tongue confesses. This is not a secret event. This isn't something that people are going to go, gosh, is that really the Messiah coming back? There's not going to be any denying when you see this thing that's coming.
We have like a tornado warning. When the tornado warning signs go off, you're alert. Like, okay, there's a
Yes.
tornado in the air. We got to be on alert to look out for what's coming. So it reminds me of the blowing of trumpets. It's like it's an alert telling you something's coming, which is the Messiah.
Amen. Right. So the reason that we plug in, that most of us know to plug in prophecy with the holy days, is because of what happened with the spring holy days. Until then, the holy days were commandments that the people kept. And then the prophecy was fulfilled that from the going forth of the rebuilding of the command to rebuild the temple until the Messiah shall be 490 years, whatever time it is, right? And that landed exactly on Passover. The Messiah was killed as the Lamb of God on 14 Abib as the Passover lamb. He was resurrected 3 days and 3 nights later on the day of first fruits. So now we checked off Passover, we've checked off first fruits. Then 40 days later, he ascends. And then 10 days later, on the day of Pentecost, he sends the Holy Spirit, and the apostles were still together, keeping the day of Pentecost, of Shavuot. So we go check, check, check. Those are three important events that have changed humanity and changed the history of the world that happened on holy days. So what about the rest of them? And so then we go and look at the rest of them. And Paul talks about the Feast of Trumpets being the time when the Messiah returns. We also know from Acts 1, where the angels ascended, when the Messiah ascends, and the angels go, well, he's going to come back the same way he left, and by floating or flying or whatever. So it's not a stretch for us to attach significance to the holy days. Now, because he fulfilled these prophecies, doesn't mean you stop observing the day. We see that Paul writes to the Corinthians, therefore let us keep the feast. And he goes through and tells them to keep the feast in 65 AD, not with the leaven of the Pharisees, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So he taught Gentile converts to the faith to keep the Passover where they were by getting rid of unleavened bread. So we have a lot of cohesion in how are we observed today, because we are mirroring the first century believers. These are people in Corinth who were not Jewish, because Corinth, maybe there were some that were, some that weren't, but Corinth is a pagan city. And Paul taught them to keep the Passover, and he directly related it to the sacrifice of the Messiah. And then Paul tells us that the return of the Messiah is going to happen on the day of trumpets. So I'm just hammering this point home, not for you guys, but for people who might be watching or who might watch it later. This is just a slam dunk. And when he comes back, it's going to be with legions of angels. It will be loud and it will be visible. Now you say, okay, well, the holy days are fulfilled, so we don't have to do them anymore, right? Wrong. Because we're going to look at the first fulfillment of the Day of Atonement, Day of Trumpets, Yom Kippur, which is Joshua 6, 1 through 5. This is, those who may not know, this is a fulfillment of the Day of Trumpets. Jericho was tightly shut because of the sons of Israel. No one went out and no one came in. Yahweh said to Joshua, see, I have given Jericho into your hand, with its king and the valiant warriors. You shall march around the city, all the men of war, circling the city once. You shall do so for 6 days. Also, 7 priests shall carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day, you shall march around the city 7 times. The priests shall blow the trumpets. It shall be when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people will go up, every man straight ahead. Golly, doesn't that sound like what Paul's talking about and what Leviticus 23 is talking about? So they go 7 times around the city. We know from Peter that a year is as 1,000 days to the Lord, and 1,000 days is as a year. So we apply that to this and say this earth has 6,000 years, give or take, of being able to build up our cities, of mankind doing it on its own and building up our pagan or our self-willed uh, religions and traditions and whatever. And then at the end, at that seventh trumpet, as they march around 7 times, at the 7th trumpet, there's going to be a huge calamity and the city is going to fall. That city is Babylon. The city isn't Jericho, it's Babel. It's the world's empires are going to crash down when the Messiah returns at the sound of a trumpet. The same thing happens here with Israel. They were in the desert 40 years. The Jericho people were terrified of the 2 million people marching around, getting strong in the wilderness. They knew when those guys decided to come in that they were going to lick the land clean. There's nothing you could do to stop it, right? And so you have the crossing of the Jordan, wide open. You could see it from elevated places. This is not in secret. You understand that Christianity teaches that the Messiah is going to return after a secret rapture. None of this is secret. All of this is easy to see. It's going to be easy to see coming. They could see the 2 million people in the desert for 40 years. Word got out. They had a cloud, and you could probably see their trail they left behind them from space. This is an enormous undertaking, and you stop up a river miraculously for 2 million people to get across. That's going to make the news. They're coming across right in front of Jericho. Jericho's got a walled city, and they think they're going to sit there, and they're probably ready for a battle. They probably had spears and horses and everything. Well, probably didn't have horses on the wall, but spears and oil and everything up on the wall and ready to actually do some fighting. And what happens? They march around the city taunting them. They're not, they don't know they're taunting them, but they're marching around the city. They're not doing anything. They're just marching around it, right? And then at the 7th time, they blow the trumpets, they all shout, and the walls come falling down. And those people never had a prayer, except for Rahab. Rahab the harlot knew the people were coming, knew that Yahweh was the real Elohim, knew what was good for her, and she hid the spies. She lived a bad life. She repented and joined the family of Yahweh right before it fell. And she not only became grafted into the family of God, she's in the lineage of the Messiah. Do you see how the New Testament isn't really telling us that much new stuff? Whoever you are, as a sinner or as a foreigner, you just figure it out that Yahweh's the real Elohim, and you do what he says, and you will be granted salvation. She was granted salvation. Her name is written in the Bible, and her name is most likely inscribed in the book of life. I'm going to put a little money on that. And that's what we're looking for here. And so the parallels here between the marching of Jericho, which is a fulfillment of the Day of Trumpets, and what's going to happen at the end of days. How many plagues are in the book of Revelation? 7, right? 7 plagues, 7 trumpets. We can see these things start to make sense to us, and wish that regular Christians would pay more attention to this stuff, because your life or your spiritual life gets a lot easier when you do this. Next up is Mark 13. So Yeshua foretells the destruction of the temple. A lot of people want to say what happened in AD 70 was the fulfillment of the Day of Trumpets, and that was it. We just got through talking about how Jericho was the first fulfillment of the Day of Trumpets. This is probably the second. It doesn't mean that it doesn't going to happen again, because the Messiah didn't come back when the temple came down, right? But the temple did come down. So as he was going out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Teacher, behold, what beautiful, wonderful stones and wonderful buildings." And he said to them, "You see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another which will not be torn down." As he was sitting at the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John were questioning him privately. "Tell us then, what will these things be? What will be the sign when all these things are going to be fulfilled?" And he said to them, "See to it that no one misleads you. Many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and will mislead many. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be frightened. Those things must take place, but that is not yet the end. For nation will rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be earthquakes in various places. There will also be famines. These things are merely the beginning of birth pangs. Be on your guard, for they will deliver you to the courts, and you will be flogged in the synagogues, and you will stand before governors and kings for my sake as a testimony to them. The gospel must first be preached to all the nations. When they arrest you and hand you over, do not worry beforehand about what you are to say, but whatever is given to you in that hour. But say whatever is given to you in that hour. For it is not you who speak it, but it is the Holy Spirit. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise up against their parents and have them put to death. You will all be hated because of my name, but the one who endures to the end will be saved." And we'll keep going on this, but just pause for some commentary. There's false Christs. There are entire Christian prophecy systems erected around Messiah coming back in AD 70. He did not come back in AD 70. The temple came down, and that fulfills the prophecy. But also remember that the prophet Isaiah and the book of Revelation, a lot of times they're talking about two things at one time. And it's hard to tell the difference until we get past the events and look out and look back. He didn't come back in AD 70. There was no resurrection in AD 70, and we don't live in a millennial kingdom right now. So this stuff is not the ultimate fulfillment, but he's talking about AD 70 here, but he's also talking about another future event that's going to happen at the same time. I don't know why it's cyclical like that. But as we move on, and when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, let the reader understand, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. The one who is on the rooftop must not go down or go in to get anything out of his house, and the one who is in the field must not turn back to get his coat. Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, but pray that it may not happen in the winter. For those days will be a time of tribulation such has not occurred since the beginning of the creation, which God created until now and never will. Unless the Lord had shortened those days, no life would have been saved, but for the sake of the elect whom he chooses, he shortened the days. So we look at the abomination of desolation is in all caps because that happened before. That happened in the Maccabees. The Maccabean revolt had the abomination of desolation set up in the temple, and the Maccabees revolted, and they had to fight on the Sabbath because they were going to die if they didn't do that. He's talking about something here that already happened once, that then happened again on a grander scale. The Maccabees were not, the Jerusalem was not that big when they were taken out by the Greeks. They weren't as big as they were when they were taken out by the Romans. When the Romans came, it took years of siege in order for the temple to come down. So the fact that what I'm getting at here is the abomination of desolation has been set up twice. Can it be set up a third time in the final? Why not? Right? Can, right? And it says where it should not be. Right? It's not, it's a little bit of a parsing there. Does it say in the temple? It says where it should not be. Okay. So maybe there's something to that. But there's going to come about a tribulation that has not occurred since the beginning of the creation. I believe that AD 70 was that for that time. But what's going to come here in the future before the Messiah comes back is going to be enormous. You know, there are people on islands in the Pacific who are going to be affected, people who are in Aborigines in Australia, every eye, every tongue. There's going to be tribulation that shakes the entire earth. And we look at these hurricanes today, and Asheville, North Carolina is very affluent, easy peasy place, very expensive houses, lots of good careers, and very far inland, and it just got erased. That's just a sampling of what's going to come. We have it really good. And we know that we're on the way down. We've been on the way down for many decades. But we at some point, it's all going to crumble. Now, whether that happens in bits and pieces over time, who knows? But when this country actually does fall, though, it's going to be a free-for-all for the rest of the world. We have ships and military everywhere. When they run out of money and arms, then there's going to be bad guys everywhere doing bad stuff. So if anyone says to you, behold, here is the Messiah, or behold, he is there, do not believe him. For false messiahs and false prophets will arise and will show signs and wonder in order to lead astray, if possible, the elect. But take heed, behold, I've told you everything in advance. So that's something that we have to study to understand what is a false messiah and what is a real one. Pretty easy today. If somebody comes up, tells me that they've got a vision and they know what's going to happen and I need to follow them, and I'm going to say, oh, yeah, could you get me a ham sandwich? If they give me a ham sandwich, I'm not listening to them. Okay. Okay. It's that simple. If they're not following the Torah, they're not Messiah. They're a false prophet. And this is difficult because sometimes Yahweh does give accurate prophecies through bad people, right? What was the name of the guy in Moab? The donkey guy, Balaam? Yeah, Balak? Yeah, right? And he does, and King Cyrus, pagan king that restored Israel. So truth does come through people that we don't see, we don't understand, but we'll have to be able to evaluate these people for their falsehood. And the only way to do that is to know your Bibles. That's all we got. Unless you want to go all Pentecostal and just be like, I feel it, right? Sorry to tease. But in those days, after the tribulation, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers that are in the heavens will be shaking. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send forth his angels and will gather together his elect from the four winds, from the farthest end of the earth to the farthest end of heaven. So the years of the tetrad moons, the first Sukkot, where we had the giant red moons, about 10 years ago, well, maybe a little less, I was in Wewoka, and Diana was in South Carolina. She was going to see our nephew or our niece graduate from boot camp. And I looked at that red moon and I called my wife and I said, if it still looks like that in the morning, you just turn that car around. Okay. Okay. Because it says the sun will be dark and the moon will not give its light, and the big red moon. So the celestial things, a lot of people in our movement like to talk about eclipses and celestial events as if they are some special thing. This is not a predictable event. This is something that happens where people are going to go, what just happened there? The moon's going to not give its light, and it's probably not going to give its light for a while. Not 2 hours and you're looking at it with your glasses, right?
Yeah.
This is not a normal occurrence, and it's going to be a global occurrence. Yes, ma'am?
Oh, I've never seen this before when I look at it. Will it be the time that the sun should be shining and it will be darkened? Or is it nighttime when it's already darkened and the moon will not give its light either?
I'm going with both.
Because I've been thinking it's like a, wasn't there a red and a black, and then when they're both black, anyway, so it has.
Maybe it's because it's more than a day.
Yeah.
Maybe because it's more than a day and then it's like starts in the sun and then the moon and it's just completely dark for days.
I don't know. Well, but there's also the stars will be falling from the heaven. Yeah. So I mean, I've been out on the ocean when I was a kid, in 20s, on the ship in the middle of the ocean at night on a moonless night. That's darkness that you can feel. Okay. Brent goes underground, right? The lights go out. There you're gone. This is talking about something unusual, and we don't quite know what it is yet. But when this celestial events happen, then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. So he did give us some hints here. We're going to have some celestial events that people can't explain. They'll probably try to explain it, probably call it global warming, right? they'll probably blame something unrelated on it. And then he'll send forth his angels and will gather together his elect from the four winds and the farthest end of the earth to the farthest end of heaven. This I would look at and say the first resurrection. When the Messiah comes back is when the dead in Messiah rise first and everybody rises to meet him in the air, both the living and the dead. The sea gives up the dead, and all of these, all the saints who've ever lived, all the elect, are gathered from the four winds to go back. This is not a second Exodus. This is not people packing up and walking over to Jerusalem trying to save themselves. This is something that's going to happen, that if you're the elect, pray we are, that we're just going to start going up. We're not going to have any choice in the matter. And we're just going to be gathered. Not like a gathering like he did in the Exodus, when it said he kept them like under his wings and gathered his people and they marched. This is something entirely different. Learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and put forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. Even so, you too, when you see these things happening, recognize that he is near, right at the door. Truly, I say to you, This generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Now I'll get a little bit of a discussion with a guy online who's telling me that he said that generation shouldn't pass away. So that must have happened while those guys were alive. No. We have the former times and we have the latter times. In Hebrew, they had 2 seasons in Israel. And so you have the former times before the Messiah, the latter times after the Messiah. We're still this generation. Even though we're 2,000 years out, we are that generation. Because as far as prophecy goes, as far as the Bible goes, we are in the same exact spot today as AD 70, as when the gospel went forth from Zion, and Paul's teaching people to keep Passover in their cities. We're still in that same theological plane of existence. We have had the rise of the Christian church. We've had the rise of Catholicism. We've had Protestantism. But why we're first century Christianity? Because 21st century Christianity should look just like first century Christianity. We're in the same theological place. Okay? And now he goes and says, of that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. This is talking about the Day of Trumpets. This is a Hebrew idiom for the first day of the 7th month, because it's the only holy day that you don't know exactly when it's going to happen. Now, today we're on the calculated calendar, unabashedly on the calculated calendar. And again, this year it's right. The people who cite the moon cited it last night. And I was like, oh, look at that, right? Sometimes it's wrong. Sometimes it's right. I think that when he returns is probably not going to be exactly aligned with the calendar, but it's going to be close enough that we're going to go, oh yeah, right? We have to be on the lookout. We're not going to know exactly the day or the hour. We think it's, what's that? Your moon app? And what does your moon app say? 1% on the positive. All right. So, waxing crescent. So on the moon app, we're there, right? But this is it aligns this year. It aligned with the tetrad moons. Sometimes it doesn't align. Sometimes people swear to me that it doesn't align. And one time we walked out after Passover, because the Passover is 14 Abib and 15 Abib is the first day of unleavened bread. And I looked up and there was the biggest, fullest moon right in front of me. And I'm like, why are these people telling me this calendar's wrong? Right? It's right there in front of me. You know, same thing with the tetrad moons. They lined up on the calculated calendar. But that doesn't mean that means that we're doing the best we can. And we just have to understand that none of these calendars are right. He's going to come back and it'll be in the fall and it'll be somewhere around the holy days, right? And it'd be really nice if he came back on our calendar, but he's coming back on somebody's calendar, right? But when he comes back, we have to be willing to be corrected. We have to be willing to have a humble and contrite hearts and not be so married to our doctrines that we miss out. Because that's one way of a deception, is that you're so convinced of your doctrine, as Paul was before he was converted on the road to Damascus. He was so convinced of his doctrine that he was exactly doing the opposite of Yahweh's will. And he had to be humble. So we have to be willing to be corrected. Take heed, keep on the alert, for you do not know when the appointed time will come. Isn't that interesting that it's called the appointed time? We notice it. It's in italics, but it's an appointed time. The day that the Messiah was going to return was established at the foundation of the earth, when the appointed times were made, the sun and the moon and the stars. It is like a man away on a journey, when upon leaving his house and putting his slaves in charge, assigning to each one his task, also commanded the doorkeeper to stay on the alert. Therefore, be on the alert, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, whether in the evening at midnight or when the rooster crows or in the morning, in case he should come suddenly and find you asleep. What I say to you, I say to all, be on the alert. So we keep the appointed times. Doesn't that keep us ready? If we keep his Sabbath and we keep his Passover and we keep his trumpets and we keep his fast and we keep his Sukkot, if we keeping his time and studying his word, we're staying ready. We're on the alert. We're prepared for the master of the house to return. Because that was a parable. He says, just right here, he says, the master of the house returns. When he finds his slave doing what he told them to do, then that's the expectation. When you go astray and he comes back, then you get discipline. All right. I actually meant to stop earlier. So we'll go to 1 Corinthians 15 to wrap up where we began. The resurrection of Messiah. Now I make known to you, brethren, the gospel which I preached to you, which you also received, in which you also stand, by which also you are saved, if you hold fast to the word which I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. For I delivered to you as of first importance, which I also received, that Messiah died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried and raised on the third day according to the scriptures, that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time, most of whom remain until now, but some had fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James and to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared to me also. For I am the least of the apostles, and not fit to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. By the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace toward me did not prove vain, but I labored even more than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God within me. Whether it was I or they, so we preach, and so you believed. Now, if Messiah is preached that he has been raised from the dead, how do some of you say there is no resurrection of the dead? That's aimed at modern Christianity, does not believe in the resurrection of the dead. They believe the eternal souls go straight up to heaven. Now, if there's no resurrection of the dead, then not even Messiah has been raised. He was raised for our example, and that, as the chapter goes on, to show that this pattern is going to apply to all believers. If Messiah has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain. Your faith also is in vain. Moreover, we are even found to be false witnesses to God, because we testified against God that he raised Messiah, whom he did not raise, if in fact the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, not even Messiah has been raised. And if Messiah has not been raised, your faith is worthless. You are still in your sins. Then those who have fallen asleep in Messiah have perished. If we have hoped in Messiah in this life only, we are of all men to be most pitied. But now Messiah has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who are asleep. Okay, we start with this language of the holy days again. The Messiah is the first fruits of the dead, because he was resurrected on the day of first fruits. Okay, this is Paul's using this language so casually that most people miss it. For since by a man came death, by a man also came the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Messiah all will be made alive. All will be made alive. Those who accepted him and those who didn't. There will be a resurrection of the righteous, and there will be a resurrection of judgment. All people are going to be resurrected. That's not what Christianity teaches. They teach that people are judged immediately and they go to heaven or hell. It's different. But each in his own order, Christ the first fruits, and those who are his, after that, those who are Christ at his coming. And then comes the end, when he hands over the kingdom to the God and Father, when he has abolished all rule and all authority and power. There's an order here. Messiah is resurrected as the first fruits. Those who are his at his coming, Yom Teruah, today. Then comes the end, the second resurrection, which happens on the 8th day of Sukkot or after Sukkot, depending on how you want to word that. Then comes the end when he hands over the kingdom to the God and Father, when he has abolished all rule and all authority and power, for he must reign until he puts all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy that will be abolished is death. Also from the book of Revelation, in Revelation 20. For he has put all things in subjection under his feet, but when he says all things are put in subjection, it is evidence that he is accepted who put all things into subjection to him. So Paul is already dealing with people who parse stuff out, saying, well, if Messiah puts everything in subjection, does that mean God's subjected to him? No, it's obvious, it's accepted that God is not unsubject to him, right? That's what he's saying. When all things are subjected to him, then the Son himself also will be subjected to the one who subjected all things to him, so that God may be all in all. So that's the pattern that's coming, the order of the events that are coming in front of us. And we wait and we're patient and we wonder why we have all these wars and why some people live and some people die and some people have cancer and some people don't have cancer. And we all have these different struggles. But when we realize that there is a large plan here that's being played out, we can have a lot more confidence as we go about our day and our walk and our faith, to understand that there is a plan, it is coming, and we're supposed to comfort one another with these words, that we're supposed to take solace in the fact that there is a plan here, even though things look really bad. The people running our country couldn't be less mature or less capable of doing that in the history of this country, right? That's really bad. And then we look over at the Europeans and they look the same. And then we look at the bad guys, and the bad guys look to be knowing their badness and knowing what's going on. Why does this happen? Right? Because Yahweh is going to smite them. We're all going to witness Jericho fall. These bad guys are not going to prevail. They may win battles in this lifetime, but the actual battle belongs to Yahweh. And this is where I was going to end today. I've only been talking for 50 minutes, not even an hour. Anybody have any questions? Or comments? You got to. I covered everything today.
Question is about 1527 right there. When Yeshua is putting everything, it's 27, 28, 29. He's given everything back to the Father because it's rightfully his. He says it's his. So that means Son, Father. And he says he's God, maybe all in all. It's his. He's the Father. He's in charge.
Right. And so
But I'm saying that age-old thing that people are saying Trinity-wise, God is gonna, or Yahweh is gonna make us understand everything. And I'm not quibbling with anybody that wants to say there's three in one. They're just gonna have to deal with that. But that delineates the two. For me, those two scriptures right there.
Yes, ma'am. I didn't harp on that because I always harp on that point. Right. Right. But you're absolutely right. That the plan of salvation is God sends his Son into the world, that whoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. The Son is given a mission. Most of Christianity thinks that mission stopped at the cross, that he solved everything.
Right. We just don't go, we stop when we, and the other thing that either is more clear for me or not is the day and the hour. I took that just to be the appointed time for Yom Teruah because of the sighting of the moon, but then the correlation of there's a time period there that you don't know how long that's going to take. So that furthers out, you don't know the day or the hour. You just better be watching, at the first, because it may be an extended period. You're not going to know until you see the stars falling and you see him coming.
Yes, and it took, what did it take, 5 years to take the temple down the second time? Right? That wasn't an instantaneous event. So for what I take from that, and what I take from the Jericho thing, is that the dismantling of this world is going to have this tribulation that lasts a long time. It's not just a snap thing. And that's why I was talking about how what's going to happen post America, because we're not that far away from that. Okay, okay, we're not we're I don't want to live in a world without an America, but I also don't want to live in a world with a wicked America either, right? Which we are to an extent. But this dismantling of Western civilization and the world is probably going to take some time. But on the point about him giving it back to Yahweh is very similar to how Joseph was under Pharaoh, right? It all always belonged to Pharaoh, and Joseph could run it. And at any time, Pharaoh could say, "Give it back to me." Yeshua's mission is to be subordinate to his father all the way through to the end. So he's got all the authority now. And once everything's put under subjection under his feet, he's going to turn around and offer that as a free will offering to his father, who's probably going to say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Yeah, but that's a long way from now, right? And you're right, that does illustrate the two-ness, and it illustrates his subordination to his father. Go ahead, Everett.
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified about the timing as far as Jericho goes, because I was trying to remember the exact timing of that, but I don't think it was really anywhere around trumpets, but that doesn't nullify what you had to say about there being a connection between the two. For sure. But I think there's probably more to be learned from the story of Jericho than just trumpets.
Yeah. But I was just focusing on the trumpets, the sound, the calamity, the fact that Israel was assembled over 40 years in the wilderness. That's time. Those people knew that their goose was cooked for 40 years before their goose was cooked. And the other one is Gideon. The other one I like to use for a Day of Trumpets is how Gideon was with 300 men who just made a racket, got a warring army to fight each other in the darkness. Right? And so when the sun and the moon go dark, what happens? We're going to panic. What about our country right now? Right now, you see people getting in fist fights, shooting each other over cut off in traffic, brutal beatings of kids at school by getting jumped. People who should be all friends because of the confusion and the darkness that's over this land. This coarsening, this complete evil from morning, noon, and night is causing people to just be at each other's throats all the time.
Well, and imagine what the animals are going to do.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to go crazy too.
And they're going to eat well.
They're not going to know. They're not going to know what to do. We're not going to know the time or hour, what day it is, what time it is. They're not going to be able to do anything without the sun.
Find out with that sun activity that she's talking about. Everything's gonna turn off.
Oh, the EMPs?
Yeah.
I do.
Social media, if that
Right.
turn off, people are gonna go bonkers. So maybe they'll like it.
So much for solar panels.
We had a teenager at our house yesterday who didn't have internet. He got so bored to come weed eat. Right? That's the story I heard. Right? That's why Dawson was at my house yesterday. Right? Right?
Guess your solar panels aren't going to work.
But no, we're making fun of it, but praise Yahweh that we are in a position to make fun of it with our full tummies, but this is not, I don't know. I mean, you look at the Civil War, we live in the Midwest here. There are graves everywhere from the Civil War. 650,000 Americans killed each other, brother against brother. You think about World War I, that museum is here, right? Think about World War II, and these are horrible, horrible events. And it's going to be worse than that. I mean, that's pretty bad. And, and I think it's going to take time, because a lot of people are going to be you know, well, it says in Revelation that right off the bat, like a third of the population dies, right? It's pretty bad, right? And then something else happens and another third of the population dies. It's terrible. What about people who are going to die from all the rotting bodies and the diseases? You know? Yeah. I don't-
Isaiah 61 and verse 3 or 2, I guess, may have something to do with it, because we associate the day of the Lord, which is a time of trouble, with trumpets as well. And it says to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord, the day of vengeance of our God, which is kind of associated with what Yeshua had to say in Luke 4, where he spoke in front of the synagogue. But anyway, it could indicate that this time of trouble, of the vengeance of God, is going to take a year to actually come to pass or to fruition and to complete.
All right. Right. And the favorable year of Yahweh is Jubilee, right? Yeah.
What
Is Jubilee.
Oh,
right?
well, yeah, and that would be, yeah,
Right.
associated with it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the topic that's just hit me today to talk about at Sukkot. That is, when do we tie in Jubilee? Because the return of the Messiah is going to be a Jubilee, right? That's whether I'm not saying that we need to figure out when the Jubilee year is to look for the Messiah. Okay. Okay. What I'm saying is that is the actual practical application of it that that all of our sins have been heaped up and piled up for how many thousands of years now, and that when he comes and executes vengeance, we know it's appointed for men to die once, and after this comes a judgment. So when people die once, they're paying for their sins. This is a release of sins, a release of debts when the Messiah comes back, and we start fresh with the Messianic kingdom. So that's what I'm tying into this. For us, the favorable year of Yahweh is favorable. For everybody else, it's a day of vengeance, right? Right? It's not a good thing. What do you think is going to happen when Elon Musk has to be able to operate with no money? Okay. Right now, Elon Musk is enjoying changing the world in many ways for the better because he has more money than anybody else, and he's got the ability to rescue astronauts. Okay. He's a very powerful man. What happens at the release of debts when he starts back from zero? And what happens with those of us who have enormous amounts of debt and aren't financially good when we get to start back from zero? When we get to live in an economy that is fair. That's a good thing for us. But for the wealthy people, not going to be a good day. Okay. When you look at this union guy who's threatening, who has shut down the entire commerce of the country, has a yacht that's bigger than Elon Musk's. Okay. Now, I'm not one to envy people's wealth, but what's coming and what was supposed to happen through the Torah is a 7-year release of debts and a 50-year complete restoration, which I only have evidence that the sabbatical year was kept from the book of Maccabees. I don't see any evidence in the actual Bible that that was ever kept or that the Jubilee was ever kept. Okay. We know that Israel was thrown into captivity 70 years each year that they didn't keep the sabbatical year, right? They went to Babylon. So this is important. I think this is, sorry, you put a quarter in me, Everett. I think it's all tied in to the restoration because mankind is supposed to live like that. And I think that the return of the Messiah is, yay, he's great. It's going to be great. We're going to go visit him in the air. But we're also going to get to live for 1,000 years in a righteous government with the release of debts, the 7-year cycles. This is going to be something joyous and peaceful, and it's something for us to look forward to. But for those who are able to live in decadence today, they might have to learn how to plow, right? Right? Because the kingdom is not, this is another thing that Christianity looks at the kingdom of God as if we're all just going to float around on clouds and play spades every day. It's a kingdom of working and doing and living and agriculture. And I don't know. It's all going to start from zero. Anybody else on that? Because I'm just thinking about that today. So maybe I should talk about that next. Yeah. Yeah. What about verse 1? Who do you think that's talking about? Yeah.
That's a little bit earlier. That's yeah, Yeshua. Yeah.
They will rebuild the ancient ruins. They will raise up the former devastations. They will repair the ruined cities, the desolations of many generations. Nehemiah and Ezra did that. But it's going to happen again. Right?
Probably in a bigger way.
I reckon so, sir. Yeah. I think it's going to be something. Strangers will stand and pasture your flocks, and foreigners will be your farmers and your vine dressers. You understand, everybody hates Israel today. What's coming is a time where everybody's going to cling to somebody's tzitzit. So strangers are going to be happy to have jobs in Israel. People who hated the Jewish people are going to have a complete 180. It's going to be great. And you will be called priests of Yahweh. You will be spoken of as ministers of our Elohim, and you will eat the wealth of nations, and their riches you will boast. Yep, going to be great. First things first, though, Messiah has to come back, which is why we're talking about this here on the Day of Trumpets.